All right, everybody, welcome to the Creative Finance Collective. This is our opportunity to get together and talk about all things creative finance. Today we have myself, Andy Fowler, and Sean St. Clair here today. We had a couple other folks that were going to be on here that aren't feeling well, so it's just going to be the two of us unless somebody else shows up. If you're just now joining us, we're going to be taking questions we'll be here as long as an hour, but we'll be on here as long as we're getting questions. So what questions are we looking for? This is the Creative Finance Collective, so we're here to talk about creative finance, creative financing, and work through issues that you've seen, questions that you have about that. So make sure to post that in the chat, and we'll get to those if there are any questions. Sean, I think one of the biggest difficulties about this episode is we're competing with a pretty big event today, the election, and um, half the people out there in your neck of the woods are probably leaving work to go get in line. What time is it there?
I don't
4?
know how I don't know how that could compete with our show, honestly.
You know, uh,
No,
no.
no, like watch our show and then go take care of whatever business you need to take care of, type
Yeah,
of thing. But
creative finance should lead your level of importance.
yes, it should. But yeah, I think people are getting ready to. I mean, we were with all the many of the other states that had early voting. My wife and I both already voted via early voting, so I've just kind of been sitting back today, with the news channels on, just getting kind of a forecaster take on what they think. And apparently, the first polls will close. I'm looking at now in about a little less than an hour, so that'll give us kind of the first indication of which direction things are going in, the race for the White House, as well as other federal races and even some state local races. So
Well, you
it'll
live
be
in a swing
interesting.
state, and I live in a swing state.
Yeah.
Probably ready to be done with that.
Yeah, there were a lot of ads, man, a lot of ads, especially our Senate race out here is kind of heated up. I guess there's a two-term senator that is kind of in a tight race with Republican challenger. So we'll see how that plays out. But yeah, um, it's definitely interesting being in a swing state. I wonder. I've never lived. I mean, I grew up in California, but I was young, don't fully remember it. But I've lived in Arizona and now Wisconsin. Always seemed to be a swing state. I mean, since I lived in Arizona, we've had Democrat governors and Republican governors. Like there was never anything just locked in. I'm curious what the ads look like and what things look like in states that aren't swing states. Like
Right.
the Californias of the world or New Yorks or middle of the country that tend to vote Republican.
Yeah, right. If you're just now joining us, we're taking questions about creative financing. I know there's a lot going on with the election. A lot of people have their attention turned other ways, but we thought we'd come on and take questions and talk about creative financing if there are any questions. So make sure to post them. We'll give everybody a few more minutes to post a question if you got it in the chat, and we'll get to that. I'm curious, Sean. You mentioned you voted early. I did too. I voted a couple weeks ago, and one thing was true for me is that just as soon as I did that, my ballot was verified. I stopped getting texts. That really did happen.
Oh,
I had read a thing that said, hey, one of the advantages to voting early is the candidates can pull that data and then then they reallocate resources, right? They know that, okay,
mm-hmm.
this person's already cast a vote. We don't know what the votes cast, but we know that at this point they've cast it and there's nothing we can do to
Mm-hmm.
change that. So they remove you from, you stop getting certain texts and other things.
Well, see, I don't know if that's true or not in the sense that this is my first year being registered to vote in Wisconsin. And so I continue to get all of the Arizona political ads because they don't show that I voted in Arizona.
Yeah.
And so I end up getting those. despite the fact that I am no longer registered there, but am registered in Wisconsin. So in any event.
So what's going on in the world of creative financing? I noticed the average 30-year fixed mortgage rate is now back up over 7%. That's been trending up over the last couple days. It seems like in our last discussions, the thought has been there's been things have been somewhat slow in that area. I think a lot of people are sitting on the sidelines and uh, and waiting. Has that still been the case as you've observed it?
Yeah, and I still kind of go back. I think we talked about this last week. I mean, I think it has slowed down, and I think part of the reason is because much of the market share and availability of low interest rate loans for sellers that were interested in getting out um, has been eaten up. I mean, people have found those transactions, they've secured those transactions, and I don't know that there's tons of other or different opportunity or other, I shouldn't say different. I don't think there's tons of opportunity with those low interest rate loans. I think the opportunities, if you call them opportunities, are to go after the properties purchased, 2022 or later, where people have purchased them, have had a change of circumstance, a job relocation, whatever. They're not able to continue to afford those properties. And so now they're looking to unload them, but they're kind of upside down. So not only do you have a property that's upside down, but you have a higher interest rate that you're having to deal with. And so I'm not sure that those are even properties that you want to pursue. We've talked to people before and had people on our interim podcast, guests who, deal with low equity properties. But it takes a lot of creativity to figure out how am I going to make these properties work and cash flow and that type of thing.
Right. Yeah. Very interesting. If you're just now joining us, we're taking questions, creative finance questions. That's the purpose of the show here. So if you have those, make sure to post those, and we will get to them. So far, um, as we go, we're adding more listeners here, so we may get some questions. Um, it's interesting. It'll be interesting to see what kind of approach investors take in order to kind of bird dog some of these opportunities, because I think, like you said, that kind of the distress situations maybe have gotten bought up. But we know from the data lots of low interest mortgages are sitting out there on homes with equity. It may just be the low equity ones, or the trouble ones are always going to move first because people got to move those. So something has to
Mm-hmm.
happen with those. It'll be interesting to see what kind of the investors' strategy is to get, sellers that are just sitting, that are, oh, I can't remember the term they had for them. Basically, it's almost like golden handcuffs, but
Yeah,
you're stuck. You don't want to move because you love
right.
you love your mortgage.
Yeah, that's exactly right. But at some point, circumstance change. People list the properties for sale. The properties maybe don't move, and then the question is from an investor standpoint, those lower interest rate loan properties tend to have equity,
Yeah.
and sizable equity. Well,
Hmm.
the seller wants that. Generally, the seller needs that to go and buy another house
Hmm.
or to pay rent, to move, whatever the case may be, right? Um, so as an investor, what are you going to do? Are you going to borrow that money? You're going to, bring the capital to the table to buy out the equity and then take over that low interest rate loan? Does it make sense to do that? I don't know. Those are a lot of questions I think that are out there right now.
Hmm.
Um, and I have a little bit of experience with some investing, but I wouldn't in any way call myself, an experienced investor, if you will, and able to answer those questions. I mean, we have a lot of clients and friends of the show and followers who, are more experienced than we are in that. We're really talking more, about the legal side and what kind of, paperwork you need and that type of thing.
Yeah,
And
for
yeah,
yeah, I'm in agreement with that. I kind of just raised the hypothetical as something I think it's going to be. I think we're going to watch it play out. I mean, that's what we're going to be watching in the coming months is how the investors, the not us, but the investors, how they're going to, find sellers that want to move off their.
right.
I mean, there's always going to be the sellers that want to move that have to sell because maybe a job or whatever else, but with the interest rate situation, I think I've always thought it creates a new kind of a wealth creating environment in that it puts us all in our homes for basically a long, long time. So you have a lot of folks that just don't wanna get rid of their mortgage, so they just pay it down, and then over the course of 10 years, people have a lot of new wealth that they didn't have just because they've been paying down their loan, you know? Before it was like, what was the average period of time you stayed in your home was like 5 years? Well, that's
Yeah,
how
less
long
than
ago
that.
probably.
Yeah, right. That's not happening anymore.
Yeah.
So.
So, and
Well, it looks like a friend of the show and a guest that we've had on previously with the Interim podcast is watching Mark Monroe. So he, said hello. So thanks, Mark. Glad you're watching.
yeah, yeah, no, we appreciate that, Mark, and if you're listening, shoot us a comment what you as an investor, because he's a big investor in the space,
Yeah, he
are
is.
doing,
He's very knowledgeable on subject too.
yeah, and what you're doing to find, some of these properties, because a lot of the folks we're working with, it definitely seems to be some slowing going on there. If you're just now joining us, this is the Creative Finance Collective. We're taking any questions that you have. So if you have them, post them in the chat, and we'll get to those. Otherwise, we'll close up shop. Like we said, we know there's other things going on today, like elections, and people are going and getting in line and things like that. So we certainly want to respect that. Any other any big coming changes in the law in any states that you're aware of having to do with probably not creative finance? Wholesaling is usually the area we see some sort of change in the law.
Yeah, nothing right now on our radar, although next week's interim podcast is going to be about the change in the partition law in Arizona, which will be interesting because one strategy that investors utilize is the partition strategy, which is, hey, there are people that own property together who don't want to own property anymore, but a lot of times they're relatives.
Yeah.
And, generally you don't want to be the one to file the lawsuit against your sibling who's living in the property that mom and dad previously owned, who are now deceased, and they're taking advantage of everybody and they're not paying rent. They don't want to sell, but you don't want to continue to be entitled to this property. You want your money out, but you don't want to be the one to file the lawsuit. So a lot of times, investors will come along and they'll say, okay, yeah, we're willing to take, very pennies on the dollar to just be done with it. It becomes your problem. And the investor still can partition, but as we're going to find out in next week's episode, it's going to be time consuming now. And it's not going to be a quick process. And so there's a lot to consider before you go and you buy out those heirs' interests, at least in Arizona.
Yeah, and we've talked about this in past shows. Scott Horn, who's on a lot out of Texas, he's utilized that strategy as an investor himself and as an attorney. It's not an unpopular strategy for the
No.
savvy investor, but boy, if in Arizona, it's going to throw a huge wrinkle.
Yeah, it's going to throw a huge wrinkle.
Depending on how you want to, depending on how you approach it, it could stop you from wanting to do it altogether. I guess it just depends on how
Mm-hmm.
much value you think there is in the property. It makes me wonder, I haven't researched this, but sometimes these laws are based on like some sort of model law recommendations that are given in a lot of states. I wonder if Arizona based this anywhere else. I haven't really even heard of this in other states, so I don't know if
Yeah.
it's novel here to our state in Arizona, but if it's the kind of thing that catches on in a lot of states, it's the kind of change in the laws that could basically end a whole investment strategy, I think.
Yeah. I mean, is there money that still can be made doing it this way? Yes. And, over the years, I've had clients doing the buying property from heirs and doing the partition strategy, make lots of money doing it. And there's still money to be made, but you just have to be ready for a long-term play.
Right.
You know, and it's you. Hopefully, you're not having to leverage the play, because if you are, that's a lot of interest, a lot of risk exposure that you're taking to pull it off. But you still can make a lot of money. You just have to be patient.
Yeah. Yeah, right. The name of the game is going to be knowing what you're diving into. Uh,
Right.
and yeah.
Well, and I think the process too is even going to increase the level of or amount of attorney's fees you have to pay to get it done, because there's so many steps now that you didn't have before.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep, we'll be discussing that next Tuesday, so make sure to join us if you want to see the changes in the law there and what could be coming your way in another state, I suppose,
Maybe.
if that kind of thing
Yeah.
catches on. Um, my guess is the only thing that usually prompts something like this is some sort of buying activity that regulators don't like or wanna find a way to protect, in this case, heirs, I guess, that inherit property, but we'll get into that. Well, we don't have any questions, so, why don't we just call it?
Yeah.
And, I think next week should be interesting. Post-election, people have moved on.
Very interesting.
I think a lot of people are ready to start placing money on and doing things that they've been otherwise waiting on doing.
Yeah, I think this could spur the market. The one thing, whether it's Wall Street, investments, et cetera, people don't like instability, right? They just want to have some level of certainty,
Yeah.
and know exactly what they're dealing with. So uncertainty is a bad thing. And so by next week, we'll have a certain level. We'll know more. We'll have some certainty maybe back in the market. So hopefully we'll get some guests on from around the country and get some good feedback. But yeah, I hope everyone enjoys election night, and we'll see you